それでは時間になりましたので、ただいまより京都
Now
大学
time, we would now like to open the Kyoto University and SNR Foundation webinar 2020 and Beyond Vision for Kyoto University's Future. From around the world, we are being joined by more than 600 people tuning into this program. Thank you very much for your participation. There are some notes to be said before starting the program. Please put up the slide. Everyone's lines are muted upon entry, and we'll first be having the discussion to be followed by 20 minutes of Q&A. Everyone's lines are muted upon entry and will remain on mute for the webinar. Should you have any questions, please use the chat window to submit your questions. At Kyoto University and Foundation webinar Facebook page is web streaming this program live, and this program is also to be archived on that very page as well. We're also providing simultaneous interpretation service this morning. Those of you who wish to listen in English, please do use your computer to connect to the audio in English line and click the global icon so that you can select the language of your choice. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Let me now introduce two speakers. From Kyoto University, we are welcoming the president-to-be and currently the provost of and executive vice president of Kyoto University, Dr. Nagahiro Minato. He has studied at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine from 1977 to 1980 before assuming all the positions, and he became the Dean of Graduate School of Medicine in 2010. His area of specialty is cancer and immunology. And along with Professor Honjo, he has established the theory of immunocheckpoint therapy. And in 2020, he was elected the next president of Kyoto University. Let me now introduce Executive Vice President of Kyoto University and the founder of SNR Foundation. She has a PhD in engineering from Kyoto University in 1980. She has co-founded Arte Kuno before commercializing the Rescue eye drop in 1980. And she also worked for Scan4 Pharmaceuticals in the United States, and she also successfully commercialized Amitiza. Dr. Kuno also was elected one of the 50 women, self-made women in the United States, and she is currently serving as the director and the founder of SRNI Foundation, and she has been serving as the executive vice president of Kyoto University as well. She is joining us from Washington, D.C., and I'm a Kyoto University alum and a postdoctoral student at Stanford University, and my name is Rikiya Yamashita. This morning, we will be discussing the big picture of Kyoto University under the presidency of Dr. Nagahiro Minato. Without further ado, I would now like to open the program featuring the two wonderful speakers. Dr. Kuno and Dr. Minato. After graduating from Kyoto University, you studied at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine, and Dr. Kuno studied in the Technical University of Munich. So both of you have studied abroad when you were younger. So will you start, Dr. Minato, first? Looking back on your days of studying abroad, Thank you very much for your kind introduction. So on the studying abroad, as has been touched upon in the introduction, I graduated from Kyoto University in 1995, and I had clinical training because I went to a medical school, and you usually advance to graduate school of medicine, or you may also want to major in the upper research segment of the medical studies. But I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do, and I was fortunately able to meet Dr. Bloom at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine. And in 1977, at the age of 26, I went to Albert Einstein College of Medicine in New York. Let me give you some background. Due to the pandemic, there are limited number of international students on campuses in the US and in Japan as well. And especially in the 1970s, students were scarce on campus. And in 1969, when I entered college, when I was 18, it was also the year of student demonstration, and Yasuda Auditorium of Tokyo University was also in the midst of all the student demonstrations, and the situation was very similar on Kyoto University campus as well. But that gave us much freedom. For example, you had free access to labs on campus, and given an opportunity, I spent as much time as possible in the labs as well. And I was commuting to the auditoriums and lecture rooms from the labs that I was almost living in. So I had a very good access to the lab and research environment. And that has made me feel that I want to put myself in a research environment at an earliest stage possible. And that was one of the reasons that I wanted to go to Albert Einstein College of Medicine, because I wanted to have a good environment for research. And I lived in Bronx, and Bronx back then was very different from what it is today. And it is a Jewish school, as the name of the school tells. And also in the vicinity was the Rockefeller Institute. And the atmosphere of Albert Einstein College was very different from that of Rockefeller. And Barry Bloom is an alum of Rockefeller. I've been there very many times, but it is a very authentic kind of school, and it was rather sectionalized, if you will. But at Einstein, all the doors were open, and researchers of different backgrounds were mingling in that environment. And the area of my specialty was immunology. And about 10 postdoctoral students from around the world. Well, I was actually the only Asian, but all the researchers from around the world were studying together and doing researches for the full 3 years. And I really enjoyed my time there. As to what I have learned, of course, I learned a lot in my area of specialty, but what I really value is the ties that I have come to develop my fellow researchers. And it was a very healthy and sound competition among the 10 of us. And I still keep in touch with those fellow researchers in the States or in Europe. So of course, that gave me a very good exposure to non-Japanese culture. And I was given an opportunity to live with people with very different background. And it was very exciting to be exposed to things that were new to me. So that was my take from my studying abroad. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. I am Kuno from Washington. And under Dr. Minato, I have served as an external executive for 2 years. And it's very difficult to travel to Kyoto. I regret that very much. But in my case, well, I didn't think that I would be studying abroad at all. But when I was in the graduate school, Dr. Saburo Fukui said that there is a paid position even for a student, and that's why I have decided to go to the Technical University of Munich. Later, I learned that Dr. Fukui thought that I was a very rare case. Only there were 6 female students among the 1,000 graduate students back then, and he thought that that was not really good. At least in Munich back then, there were many female students and many female researchers as well as female professors, and that was why he asked me to go. Back then, my friends and also my family have supported me, but of course there were no emails back then. It wasn't very often that you can make international telephone calls, and it was just a year. But I had to decide on my own, think on my own, and act on my own, which is very natural nowadays, but I was about to enter adulthood. And for me, that experience was really great. And back then, a female student that had a PhD, it was very difficult to apply for a job, a paid job. But in Munich, I was given a paid position. So that was a big opportunity for me. And also it was a life-changing opportunity for me. So we don't really know if the study abroad will be very useful for you or not, but it is an opportunity for you to have a chance to be out there alone and decide and act on your own. And that's an experience that you can gain if you study abroad. And therefore, I hope that many students can go abroad and gain experience. So back to you, Dr. Yamashita. Well, thank you very much. I have another question concerning study abroad. It seems that midterm and long-term study abroad for students and researchers peaked in around 2000, and from 2010, after the peak, it went down, and now it's rather flat. From China and India, there are many students studying in the United States, but now Japanese researchers in overseas universities as well as research institutions are becoming a minority. But now we have the internet, the world has become smaller, and science is becoming more international. It's becoming more diverse and more complex. In 2017, if you look at Nature Index Japan, Japan's research capabilities seem to be going down. And in the international society, the role that Japanese researchers should and are playing, as well as the role of Kyoto University and international study abroad, as well as research and international competition. What is it that you think about? And I'd like to ask the 2 professors. Well, yes, indeed, as you say, if you look at research trends, Japanese students, Japanese young researchers going abroad, we do see the number going down. In a sense, it is because of the historical flow. Yes, when I went to the United States, it was in the 1970s. That's when Japanese people were starting to go out into the world. And in the United States, there were many Japanese researchers researching new fields. It was a time when we were trying to catch up with the United States. And I probably fortunately went into a world where there were few Japanese researchers. And there were many Japanese students or Japanese researchers. There was a Japanese village per se, and they were experiencing new things, venturing out into new frontiers. But now, after 20 years or so, well, yes, Chinese students and researchers, there were many of them, but especially South Koreans. are now increasing. And after that, from Southeast Asia, we see more researchers and students coming in. And that's because of the development that we see and also the relationship between these countries and the United States and Europe. But I don't think that just studying abroad has meaning. And the role is changing. When I went abroad, Japanese people were very diligently working. I was also working and studying about 16 hours per day. I was called a data machine. When Minato comes, you can get a lot of data. That's what I was told back then. But the role that Japanese researchers are playing is now changing. We see more creative jobs being done by Japanese researchers. And Japanese researchers are now leading in small researchers groups. So science in Japan and the positioning of Japanese researchers are really maturing now and are changing now. However, on the other hand, young people not traveling abroad, when we think about technology and environment, that may be different, but you are not really being exposed to people who are different from you, people with different culture. Losing that opportunity is a great loss. So even if it's a short-term study abroad, it's very important to go. It could be any country, but going out into a world that is quite different from what you are familiar with, being exposed to different culture is essential, or else it may cause a big defect later on. So Dr. Kuno, please. Yes, thank you very much. It's exactly as you say. Well, when I went to a university after 20, 30 years, it seemed that many students were quite busy. Yes, the professors were busy, the curriculum was really full. That's my personal impression, but it seems that people can't really afford to enjoy. If we can have a little more leeway in how people spend time, it could be very important. So studying abroad, studying in the United States, for example, if you come to the United States, you have to build up and open up your own life. You have to brace yourself for that. And I believe the United States is a very good place to do that. And why is it that you are here? What can you contribute to this boss, or when are you going to say goodbye to this boss? You have to decide on your own, and you have to have the intention and also will to do that. And that is quite important. And also, even if it's difficult, you have to really push forward. You have to have the grit to do that, and you have to decide on your own that you're going to pursue it. And very early on, when you're a student or when you are still a very young researcher starting off, you have to have the experience to try something and maybe fail or push through until the very end. And I believe studying abroad gives you that opportunity. So from the United States side, I'm hoping that I can help many students have that experience. Thank you very much. Now, changing the perspective just a little bit, a question on education. Well, nowadays, we say that we are living in a 100-year life period era. People who have born 4 or 5 years ago probably will live to see their 100th birthday. So our life plans may change. It's not as if we gain necessary skills and knowledge and work for about 30 years. Studying is more flexible. Working is flexible. You can study once, work once, and then go back to studying again. We often hear about lifelong learning and recurrent learning. So the concept of learning is also changing. And also the role of universities may change within this. And also through the internet. You can take courses from prestigious universities around the world through MOOCs. So we do see these new education platforms.
のことを自分
People can learn at any time, anywhere. And with the spread of COVID-19, education is faced with a challenge as to how to provide education. As speakers have mentioned, we don't seldom see students on campus. So the education really have to have a good vision and you have to think how to take up the challenge. Starting off with Professor Minato first. Thank you. As Dr. Kuno mentioned, well, I have hired some Harvard graduate students, but I believe that Japanese students are starting late. And Harvard students, for example, have to start thinking about their future. And I think that they're more mentally mature. And students of Harvard and Japanese students cannot really have a discussion on the same level in terms of the level of maturity, if you will. And the educational process has changed quite a bit since my days. It is more like credit earned basis, and put it bluntly, it is more like a checkbox system education today. Say, for example, what needs to be learned at by what time, and there is a rigid timeline that they have to follow for them to advance to the PhD degree. So it was more like a set program, and that also will make the student in the latter 20s. And then after getting the PhD, they will think about studying abroad, and I think that is way too late. There are researchers studying abroad at a later phase of their academic life. And I think to me, it is way too late because they will have to compete with the younger contenders. So Japanese education, due to a number of issues, are having this timeline-based education, which is not necessarily optimal. So that is something that we need to review and think about overhauling. So my view is that be it online or offline, the essence of education needs to be reviewed for a possible overhauling. Otherwise, today's youth, well, the essence of education is to give motivation. Provision of knowledge isn't really the goal of education. You can find all the needed information on the internet. So the mission of education is to give motivation to students, and that is a very important role of those who teach. And that is something that I am a bit concerned about, and we should deserve a discussion on this very important topic. I agree with you, Dr. Minato. And this isn't really my original thought, but this is something that I learned from Professor Minato. So what should we be doing at university? Research, study, and what are the differences? Well, my interpretation is that studying is something that you study something with an answer. Research is an activity that seeks that answer. And through that process, a student can gain something out of that very process. So study is for knowledge, and research is for fact or evidence. So AI-based learning has two formats of learning with teacher and learning without teacher, and I think that that is quite similar. So, but when you say learning or academic activities, I think that that is where the university education can possibly thrive. Dialogue with self, or making a self-decisions or training oneself. And that is the process to raise the level of comprehensive capability as a human being. So this also involves a very nebulous phase without certain clear answers until one gets this so-called aha moment. And that is the process that you will be better at navigating yourself through the next phase of nebulous process. So what you can learn, you can gain wisdom or bravery or audacious stance or resilience, autonomy, or leadership is something that you can learn from your academic endeavor for you to become a mature and true, genuine leader. And then Yamashita-san's question is wonderful. But knowledge would include online system can give education and students can use that as needed. But what really counts is the ecosystem. For example, Harvard have its own ecosystem, Oxford have its own ecosystem, and Kyoto University too has its own ecosystem. And that is a very ecosystem predicated on its liberal academic environment, and Kyoto University should be finding its own mission against this backdrop. Let me make a small announcement. Those of you who want to ask a question, please do use the Q&A icon to enter some questions. The area of specialty for Professor Minato is medical science, and you have once served as the dean of the medical school. Recent years, medical research includes a number of stellar researches, PD1, which won the Nobel laureates by Professor Honjo, and this is having a positive impact on a great number of patients. And Professor Yamanaka's IPS study has paved the way for the state-of-the-art science in medicine. So Kyoto University have produced a great number of wonderful researchers. So medical research is at Kyoto University. What is its strength? Or what is the strength of the ecosystem of Kyoto University? What are the areas where it needs a bit more work? And how do you envision your leadership within that environment? Can you share with us your visions, plans, or any challenges that you are willing to take up? Well, Kyoto University's strength covers not only medical school, but other schools as well. Originality is the core of Kyoto University's strength. And that also is a mirror image of diversity. And liberal study or liberal academic freedom, what is it? It means that students can study any topic and subject of their choice without any restrictions. And everything that is encouraged on campus is originality. And that is more like an individualism. Individual researchers or students can deepen their areas of interest. And Kamio Kande, for example, was a huge project of one individual researcher or led by one individual. And Dr. Yamanaka's IPS2 was a major discovery, and that was the result of his individual project. And that has become a new area of study of its own merit. And Dr. Hayashi lost her grounding too. So these researchers have picked one area of specialty and expanded the area of specialty. And I think that is really the tradition of Kyoto University. It's not that one should be starting a project with a major team with tons of money, but rather we start small, but we make a very keen and sharp discovery.
The joy that we feel is when we create new things. And we also need to communicate what we've found. Well, interesting study. If we are just having fun alone, that is not good enough. We need to communicate what we are doing, and we are enjoying that process. And I believe that is the culture that has been shared in Kyoto University for 100 years. And I believe that this will continue to live on. Thank you very much. Yes, indeed. It is very encouraging to hear you say that. What we have been learning, especially including from what we've learned from Dr. Hayashi, is all about doing what other people are not doing. It seemed almost natural for us to do that. So in that sense, we find things in the most unthinkable places, and that creates a new genre in some cases. It becomes a new discipline in some cases. And that's why we have these many Nobel laureates coming out of Kyoto University. Now, what I personally feel and what it is that I can do is, well, since I am pursuing entrepreneurship for social change, and it means that you have to act alone. You have to act alone, you have to jump up alone, and then you have to find your followers. And I'm hoping that I can do the same in the field of academia. Once again, look at what you were doing, remember what you were doing, and start anew, together with especially young researchers. So academic entrepreneurship is what I am thinking about. Entrepreneurship in Japanese often is linked with making profit. It's all about business, but that's not really true. It's something unknown. Maybe until you take the fourth step or fifth step, you don't know what will happen. And so if there's a theme that excites you, that in the field of research and university, the young researchers may think that they've discovered something new. We don't really know if that is something useful or not. I believe in many cases you will face such things. So maybe we shouldn't think about the economics of what you are doing, if it's going to gain profit or not, or if it's going to create some social impact. We shouldn't look at that from the very beginning, or else we won't be able to find where the big potential lies. So do what you are interested in, and you might try to communicate that to the world, and maybe people will encourage you. They may support you both in spirit as well as financially. And if everybody thought that it was exciting and interesting, then that would be the best way for things to go at a university. Dr. Yamanaka and Dr. Honjo, I believe, are creating such a role model. So I'm hoping that younger researchers can follow in their steps with courage. Thank you very much for that. Now then, from October 1st, Dr. Minato will become president and will serve a 6-year term. So I believe you have aspirations, you have the outlook for the future, and you have challenges and issues that you see. I believe you have a Minato plan of sorts. If you can tell us what it is that you have in mind, and also from Dr. Kuno, if you can provide an outside perspective from overseas about strengthening the alumni network inside and outside of Japan, and also under the new Minato presidency, what is it that you expect out of Kyoto University? So then starting from Dr. Minato, please. Well, I still have not come up with any slogan, and I don't think I will create a slogan of sorts, but universities up until now, or at least in the past several years, national universities have been a big topic of discussion in the industry as well as in politics. So how do we think about universities? I believe we have to go back to square one and think about this. Each university has their own history, especially many of the prestigious universities around the world have their own history. And Kyoto University in Japan, or rather 2 years later, we will be celebrating 125th anniversary. This is the second oldest university in Japan. Of course, the Imperial University, the current Tokyo University, is the first university in Japan. That was created when we only had one university in Japan. But back then, universities was a place of education. It was a place to nurture and train human resources like experts and politicians, bureaucrats. In France or in Europe, yes, universities was a place of education. In the 19th century or at the end of the 19th century, research came into this field. Research in the past was handled by the private sector, but because they have social impact, gradually universities started to pick up research, and especially in Germany. So research is something that should happen in universities, not just in the private sector, and also in Japan. Universities became a place not just for human resources development. Research also became a part of the university's responsibility. And Kyoto University is probably one of the first universities under the Humboldt thinking. And Johns Hopkins or Chicago in the United States have been created around the same time. They also share the characteristics. And after 100 years, Tokyo University and Kyoto University, the outside buildings have not changed, but the inside has changed. Tokyo University is still nurturing a lot of human resources that support the basis of Japan. I believe that's their mentality, but for us, it's different. What we are doing is focusing on research. We want to support research activities. I believe that is behind everyone's mindset. So if we just forget all that and just think about having a sound management of the university, that would not work. I believe Kyoto University has to rethink what it is that universities have to do. Universities are really special. What does it mean to be a part of the university community? What is it that we are expected to do? We need to have a good discussion on that. It's not just about general operating subsidies coming from the government or how we manage the university. There are 86 national universities. Everybody will become the same if we just follow the management thinking. We need to understand what it is and what does it mean to be Kyoto University. History weighs very heavily. We have been given that legacy, and we need to base our future activities on top of that. Yamagiwa, the President Yamagiwa talked about dialogue a lot. Dialogue seems static, so I want to say that we need to have a good discussion, arguments. But unless we have trust and confidence in each other, we will not be able to have discussions. It will just become a fight about how to beat the other through a vocal language. So I believe that could be my slogan, having a good discussion and argument. We need to rethink how universities should exist. What is it that universities should do? It may take some time, but that is at least what I think is my aspiration. Thank you very much for that. I think this is a world first for you to say that. Now, as for myself, as I live abroad, the characteristic of Kyoto University is where we don't see many people grouping together. Each person is acting individually. There is no horizontal connection so much, but of course, there are many alumni abroad, people living here with their families. And the alumni network, yes, indeed, is because of trust, and through dialogue and discussion, we are connecting with each other. So the Overseas Alumni Network, I do hope that I can energize this. We often hear about Harvard Club, university clubs that are established around the world. Um, we can't rent a big building for that, but I think we can have these club activities of sorts.
Say, Friends of Kyoto University, for example, separate from Kyoto University, a non-profit entity that supports Kyoto University activities. And that is the scheme that I'm currently thinking about. Well, great thing about culture, American strength is the culture of donation and donation for the next generation. So research university, Kyoto University as research university, or those exchanges between Kyoto University and its counterpart needs to be supported as well. And I also have to touch upon this. You see, we need to see more women. And every time I go home, I feel very uneasy. So this is the area that needs to be expanded. And this is my very personal request to support women. Back to Yamashita-san. The remaining 20 minutes or so will be spent on entertaining questions from the participants. Thank you very much for so many good questions. I will have to curate some of the questions. First question is about science and technology policy. Selection and focus on science and technology policy is the question that we have received, starting off with Professor Minato to be followed by Dr. Kuno. Well, not limited to science and technology or public funds for science and technology have a certain range, including the moonshot programs, to face off with global issues. I think that is part of the policy. That is quite a viable policy. But on campus, research on campus should be given an elbow room because universities are fully engaged in all those moonshot programs only. That will really compromise other activities, say, for example, science, life, and other areas may have a higher risk of endorsing or pursuing selection-focused policy. Of course, focus is important in specific areas, but there are basic science that needs to be more widely and generally pursued. And US has been quite successful because they have kept a very good balance of selection and focus and wider blue sky researches. Selection and focus is really a private sector mind. But in terms of public funds, needs-driven is a perspective with a very clear goals or challenges. Prioritization may be effective. And I think that much of the US success can be attributable to the needs-driven process. However, that is now leading to some backlash with the idea of design thinking. What again is important is originality, or what I would like to call the seeds-driven researches. Graduate programs in the United States, art is the most popular now because that is the core of originality. So there are some pendulum motion between selection and focus and blue sky studies. So regardless of the size of the budget, seeds-driven researches is something that is very important, starting off wide at the initial phase to let the process guide yourself all the way through. Thank you. Dr. Kuno, ecosystem for scholarly work is very important. And university is an ecosystem for such scholarly work. After graduation, some students go overseas to study further or to gain employment, or they may wish to change a track after several years. So each and every one, there is a question whether each and every individual should be having its own, his or her own ecosystem. Starting off with Dr. Kuno to be followed by Professor Minato. I think that this is a very simple question. It is important to have a me time. So it's important to rely on something, or it's important to seek some help. But aside from all those noises, it is important for you to be alone, to look at the issue or look at the mountain. And that is important. It's very important to have a time like that, away from all the noises, and it should be part of your routine everyday life. So in terms of ecosystem, Kyoto University is a very wonderful place, but once you're on campus, I think that that can give you a very positive prompt for you to have this me time in a meaningful way. You see, you will have ups and downs in your lifetime, and it is very important to maintain a safe harbor, if you will. The person you should be trusting most is always you, yourself. So it's imperative that you maintain a place or time for you to be alone, and university is in one of the ideal places to do so. Well, I do not fully have a grasp. I don't have a full grasp of the concept of ecosystem, but one of the issues with career development is the rigidity in Japan. And this is something that I always tell to Ministry of Education. And homogeneity is another issue. All the students graduate from college at age 18, and then many of them straight into universities. So everyone is on a rigid timeline, and you will find yourself in your 30s, and there is very limited flexibility. Even though recurrent education is now being encouraged, life should be looked at from in separate phases. And sometimes you may have to have a detour, but detour shouldn't be having a negative connotation. Career change, for example, is often considered something disadvantageous, but detour or a career change can be quite positive in the United States. Say, for example, bioscientist sometimes serves as a lawyer, for example. The same is true for Europe, but Japan is, by contrast, quite rigid, and it demands a conscious effort for Japan to change, to allow more flexibility in society. Rigidity is something that is very difficult to be shaken off by one individual. So you should be able to make your own decisions. Sometimes you want to be offensive, sometimes you want to be defensive in life. And your life should be able to be controlled by yourself. And once you feel that you're controlling your life well, then you can be more flexibly take up all the challenges that can be thrown at you. Thank you. Next. Dr. Kuno mentioned about the network building with international students. And you also have alumnums that is succeeding abroad, and some of the students are regretting that she or he could have been able to meet these people while on campus. So under the presidency of Professor Minato, do you have any plan to capitalize on the aluminum network? And from Dr. Kuno, I would like to, the participant would like to see how these alumnums are developing or utilizing the network.
I think this is a very important point, especially we will need the help of Dr. Kuno on this, but the graduate, the alumni, how do we deal with them, especially in Japan and especially Kyoto University? We are just acting locally. I graduated from this faculty, this department. That seems to be the basis. And you are confined within that group, and that's a waste. As you go out into the world, yes, you suddenly find somebody from the same university, and then that really makes you feel closer to that person just to think that you come from the same university. But don't wait for these accidents to happen. People who have spent time on the same campus are really close. And having an alumni network in a very small community may have negative effects. If you can go back and forth between the outside world and your alma mater, that may create a comfortable environment. And I believe we should spread that feeling, but we haven't been working to do that, which is fatal for a university. So maybe we should consider thinking about a more systematic way in creating an alumni network and community, because this is not going to be created naturally. Especially we have Dr. Kuno in the outside world in Washington, and we also have a contact person here in Japan. So if we can have more interaction between the university and the people who graduated and who are now active in the outside world, that would be great. Yes, I would like to play my role in this, especially living overseas. And I really was able to feel this. But with this virtual meeting like this one, virtual meetings, we can get about 400 people, 500 people attending all at once, not just alumni, but maybe this will create the good distance within this inner circle. It could be an open inner circle. We can bring in interesting people who previously had no connection to Kyoto University. It's called serendipity. By accident, we can gain this serendipity. And how do we create, or how do you facilitate more of the serendipity to happen? And I believe this is becoming a focus. So yes, it is serendipity, but we want to have more opportunities for this to happen. And probably that is what the alumni network, the community is supposed to do. And also webinars like this will also provide us with opportunities. Well, thank you very much. Next, as Dr. Minato said, that education is not just about filling in knowledge, it's about creating motivation among people. It may not be an easily answered question, but what kind of approach are you thinking about that could be effective in motivating people? It may not be easy to answer, but if you can give us your insight and your outlook. Well, face-to-face versus online. I think there's one big difference here. Recently, I looked at a questionnaire in the United States. Online classes over United States is getting better, but 70% say they say that it can't totally replace the face-to-face classes. What is lacking in online? Well, we have this professor. I want to have more physical contact, direct dialogue with that professor. And I think we felt the same way in Japan in the past. Right now, we also have a lot of online classes. It's getting better, and some people say that online classes is better. And well, then it makes us feel, then what was the face-to-face classes in the past all about? But well, online classes are convenient, but on the other hand, in relation to the question, the contact with the faculty, the interaction with the faculty, we had more interaction in the past. We went into their labs freely. The lab doors were always open. Kojiro Yoshikawa, a professor back then, I went into his room and asked him to lecture for me. And yes, he responded to my request, but nowadays, as Dr. Kuno said, because we have a very tight schedule, it's becoming more difficult to respond to requests like this from the students. Now, face-to-face, 90 minutes. If it's online, 90 minutes past, it's the end. But then in a face-to-face class, after the 90-minute classroom, students will come and surround you, and you spend the next 30 minutes speaking to the students, and still it's very difficult to get away from the students. And then in the end, you say, come to my lab late afternoon. You tell that to your students. And I believe we need to have more time to be able to do that. And the students need to enjoy that process of speaking to the professors, to their instructors. And I believe that is a very important motivator. So the people on the education side, especially as a research university, within the research process, we are providing education. We're not just providing remote education. And I believe we need to discuss that and devise more better ways of providing education. Dr. Kuno, do you have anything to add? No, I believe Dr. Minato said it all. But yes, we are a very huge university. It's going to be difficult to change everything all at once. But as was said earlier, maybe we can start with small steps, going through proof of concepts among teachers who want to start it. And if something doesn't work, you can just stop there. Just go through these POCs to decide your go and no-go. And by doing so, I believe the hurdle will become lower and lower, and somewhere along the line, it may explosively spread. Well, thank you very much. We only have about 3 minutes left. I still have many questions unanswered, but I'd like to end the Q&A session here. And I'd like to make some announcements from Kyoto University. So thank you very much, Dr. Kuno and Dr. Minato. Thank you very much to you, Dr. Yamashita. Well, then let's go back to the slides, please. Well, first of all, we don't want students who have the will and capability to learn, give up learning just because of facing financial difficulties. So we have a plan to support them. And for this, we have a fund to accept donations. And please access our webpage. You can donate from overseas as well. So we are hoping to have your continued support. And Dr. Minato, our future president, said that in 2020, we will be celebrating our 125th anniversary. And we want to strengthen internationalization, enhance research capabilities, and we want to pursue more social engagement. And we want to pursue and hone our Kyodai Ryoku, or the power of Kyoto University, and therefore we are once again asking for donations. And among the alumni around Japan and abroad, we are creating this network. We have an alumni association. We have 3 in Washington, San Francisco, and New York. And once again, you will be able to join the alumni organization. And we also have a registered online service, Kuon, Kuon. If you haven't registered yet, we would like to ask you to do so that you can receive messages from the alumni organization. Now, during the first webinar, I have already announced this, but at the Kyoto University Hospital, if you can turn to the next slide, please. In order to deal with the COVID-19, we have asked for crowdfunding. And because of your support, we have reached the next goal that we have set, which is reaching 50 million. 1,300 people have provided support, and thank you very much for that. Yes, we have reached the goal, but of course, we will be accepting donations until the end of September, so we hope that you can continue to provide support to us. Now, lastly, it's not just in Japanese, but after the seminar is over, you will see a questionnaire sheet pop up. We do hope that you can fill this in, because this will provide feedback for us to plan our future webinars. And a questionnaire sheet will be sent to you by email as well. This one is in Japanese or in English, so you can answer the questionnaire through the email as well. Well, with this, we'd like to end the seminar entitled 2020 and Beyond Vision for Kyoto University's Future. Thank you very much for staying with us until the very end.